Hello and welcome to Biblical Breadcrumbs, where today we're in Matthew Matthew chapter 7, verses 15 through 29. This is the end of the Sermon on the Mount as Jesus is finally wrapping things up. And this has been, if you think about it, it's an excellent sermon. It takes about 15 minutes to read, and it takes about 5 months to actually teach and go through in small increments. And granted, there's a lot of expansion that I've been doing and going in different directions and, trying to make applications and just the process of reading is one thing. The process of studying and contemplating is another, sure. But even still, it's kind of rare to have something that is so short that is also so deep, so important. What we have today is we're finishing it. And Jesus ends this in a very simple way. In many ways, it's a familiar way. He's just asking who you're going to pay attention to. Jesus has done 15 minutes of talking. He's done, again, a lot of, deep... he's put a lot together there. There's a lot to think on and meditate on and dwell on. But at the end of the day, it really just comes down to a simple question. Who are you going to listen to, and are you actually going to do the things that he's just said, or are you just going to kind of nod and mentally assent and kind of like agree, yeah, that was a cool thing you said, and then move on and do your own thing? It's a lot to take in, especially for someone who's just sitting there kind of like trying to figure out what Jesus is saying. It can be a lot to take in all at once, and it's very hard to do, but it's also easy to just refuse to listen to it and take it all in and sit there and let it go in one ear and out the other, or maybe go in one ear and into your brain and think about it for a while, but then you don't do anything with it and it just goes out the other, and it's in one ear and out the other, but it takes a long time to do so. It's quite easy to think of these as pithy statements that are really important, and then you just kind of don't do any of them. It's easy to make this like a philosophy where it's like, it's an ideal, but then you don't actually act upon it. It's easy to mess this up in a variety of ways. That's the point I'm making. But it doesn't do anyone good. It doesn't do anyone any good to fail to listen to Jesus, or to listen to Jesus and not do anything about it. Or to listen to bad people, to listen to Jesus, and then to listen to someone else and let them drag you away from Jesus. None of that does anything. If you're going to hear the words that Jesus spoke, you better be doing them. That's the whole message, and we'll spend a little while talking about that, but it really is that simple. Let's go ahead and read all of this. It's Matthew 7, verses 15 through 29. Again, there are 3 different little paragraphs here. You can probably even hear them as I read this. Matthew 7, starting in verse 15. Beware of the false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor figs from thistles, are they? So every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. So then you will know them by their fruits. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Leave me, you who practice lawlessness. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house, and yet it did not fall, for it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rains fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house, and it fell, and its collapse was great. When Jesus had finished these words, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority, and not as their scribes. Again, it's very simple, and if you've been around church for a while, you've probably heard these things before. We have a kid's song that sometimes we sing, the wise man built his house upon the rock, and all that, and the foolish man is kind of an idiot. That's not the lyric, but, that's what's implied. There is a difference. There's a very simple difference that's being drawn here. And so as much as we can spend a long time talking about judgment and the facets of it and the nuances that are in it, You can also spend a really short time saying, y'all should do what you're supposed to do. Because that's it. And at the end of the day, even if you don't understand every last nuance or every last Old Testament application and how exactly Jesus was calling back from this passage to that one, even if you don't understand a lot of that, if you just do the good thing, you'll be fine. That's what it is. It's really not that complicated. People like to complicate Christianity. People like to add all sorts of rules and add all man-made whatever regulations. These are the things you have to do. These are like, you should follow this way. You should read this author. You should do whatever this thing is. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's literally, okay, are you going to act faithfully? Are you going to be good? Are you going to be loving? Are you going to, not hate people? Are you going to pray? Are you going to judge mercifully? Like, it's really not that complicated, and it doesn't have to be. So, again, are you just doing what Jesus said to? The entire idea of this is based on those verses we talked about a couple weeks ago, verses 13 and 14, the idea of entering through the narrow gate. Wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who enter by it. But narrow is the gate and constricted is the way that leads to life, and there are few who find it. There's a difference there. If you want to be righteous, if you want to follow after Jesus, you have to walk what we call the straight and narrow. You have to go down the right direction. But how do I do that? Is kind of the question. So we'll explore that just a little bit in these last 3 sections. So, the first question you might ask then, okay, I want to walk the straight and narrow. Who can I learn from? Like, where do I go to find what the straight and narrow is? Where do I go to find that answer? Who can I learn from? And Jesus' warning is not these ones. In fact, he says in the first few verses here, be on guard. Verses 15 through 20 is protect yourself. You never know what's coming at you. Instead, beware of false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing. They dress up like they're pacifists, but inwardly they're ravenous wolves. They're out to get you. Be careful. As your life continues, you're going to find various times and places where various people are going to come around and they're going to try and sway your opinion. It should be noted that trying to sway people's opinions is not wrong, or at least it's not inherently wrong. One might point to such great examples of people swaying others' opinions, like Jesus and everybody else who's ever existed. Because the fact is, anytime you speak, anytime you teach, anytime you're trying to instruct, anytime you're trying to give advice, anytime you're just trying to even weigh in on a situation, you're trying to, in some way, shape, or form, sway other people's opinion to be the same as yours or to be similar to yours or to help them to form an opinion that they don't have already. And all of this is trying to sway it. All of this is trying to change it. Swaying someone's opinion is not wrong. Jesus is doing that. I am doing that. Even by saying swaying someone's opinion is not wrong, that is me attempting to sway your opinion, for those of you who are listening to this. So there you go. Is that inherently wrong? Of course not. Are there situations in which it is wrong? Well, yeah, there probably are. People who are being manipulative, or people who are lying to sway your opinion, or people who are trying to sway your opinion to something that is evil. Someone like a Hitler comes to mind, because he definitely tried to sway people's opinions, and it definitely worked for some of them, but it was in order to find an evil end. That was what he was going for. And so it's not inherently a right or wrong thing, but people can use it for good or they can use it for evil. Be aware, as you go through life, various people will come up to you. They'll have their own opinion. They'll have something that they want you to consider and think about, etc. Not all of these people are good actors. Not all of these people are righteous. Not all of these people are someone you should listen to. Be careful, be aware that some of your influences can be pretty bad and pretty wrong and just out to get you. There are some people who will come to you with agendas, trying to drag you away from Jesus. So, how do we defend against that? How can we tell if someone is evil or not? Well, here's a really complicated process in verses 16 through 20 to help you determine when someone is righteous and when they aren't. Are you ready? Look at what they do. That's the whole thing. That's literally it. You'll know them by their fruits. Verse 16. The things that they produce will show who they really are. If you want to know if someone's trustworthy enough, look at what he does. If he does things that are good and righteous, that person's trustworthy. And if he doesn't do things that are good and righteous, actually, if he actively does things, especially if he actively does things that are ungood and unrighteous, then maybe you shouldn't listen to him. It is not that complicated. Grapes. Where do you get grapes from? It's from the grapevine. You're not going to get them from the thorn bushes. That's not where they come from. Figs do not come from thistles. They come from a fig tree. It's not that complicated. If you see someone who is bearing the spiritual equivalent of thorns in their life, you probably should not be going to them for life advice, because that's not somewhere you want to end up. It's really very simple. Check what others do. You can tell who someone is by how they act. And I know there are a lot of people who exist, and a lot of people want to say, well, I know I do a bunch of bad stuff, but I'm actually a good person at heart. I would push back on that and say, well, if you do so much bad stuff, why are you so confident you're actually a good person at heart? Because it turns out we like to lie to ourselves. We like to pretend that we're good. We like to pretend that everything is fine and we're righteous and we're doing all these good things. But in actuality, if you are not righteous, if your life keeps producing evil things, maybe you're just evil. It's not that complicated. Check what other people do. You can tell who they are by how they act. And if how they act consistently results in evil things, it's not a good person. Just walk away from that. Don't involve yourself and act the same way that they do. Help the person out of the situation? Sure. Do what you can for the person? Absolutely. But do not join in with their actions. You can tell them by their fruits. You can also, what helps you in that is to compare them to the actual standard, which is God's standard. Verses 16 through 18 are really clear about this, although we don't really ever think about it much. When Jesus says, good tree bears good fruit, bad tree bears bad fruit, there's an assumption there. You know, the assumption is one of the fruits is good and one of the fruits is bad. We do not live in a world where grapes are equally edible to thorns, do we? One of those is good. One of those is bad. There is a clear distinction. One of them is profitable, and one of them does not work at all. It's very simple. Compare them to the standard. God has set a standard for what is right and what is wrong. God has set a standard for what is good and what is bad. God has set a standard for the grape and for the thorn. And if someone is living according to the thorn standard that God has decided it is objective, do not follow after them. God has told us what good fruit is. Inspect the fruit before you follow after the fruitist. That's not even a word, but there you go. Be careful who you listen to. And ultimately, we're called to wait for God's judgment in this, because every tree that doesn't bear good fruit in verse 19 is cut down and thrown into the fire. God will deal with the person who is unfaithful. God will deal with the person who doesn't do well. He'll deal with the evil person. You're not supposed to take your own vengeance, right? What we are called to do is be discerning. We're called to evaluate people, evaluate the actions that they take a good long look at them and say, this person is either pretty righteous or he's pretty not. It's not that a thorn tree can never produce anything that is beautiful. A rose bush, people like roses. The thorns are nasty, but people like the roses. At the same time, it's not like a grapevine produces a perfect batch of grapes. Some of the grapes are shriveled. Some of the grapes are not any good. Some of them are sour. Some of them are rotten. but the vast majority of them are the good kind. It's not that every person in your life, it's not that a person in your life is going to be absolutely perfect and stellar and spotless, and I can follow that guy, or just absolutely despicable and horrible and evil, and I can never follow that guy. You have to discern, what's the general trend? Is this person generally righteous, or is he not? And I don't get to determine, right? I'm not the judge. I don't pass judgment on those things. If someone is generally evil, I don't go around and say, well, I guess I got to kill him now. Like, that's not my job. Ultimately, if someone is evil, God will deal with them. The good tree, the tree that doesn't bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Make your judgments. Make your assessments. Do not take your own vengeance. God will deal with the evil ones if they need dealing with. Just be careful who you listen to and who you follow after. When someone comes up to you and starts preaching another gospel, don't go for it. It's stupid. It's not going to end well for you. Listen to Jesus' words and stay faithful to God instead of being dragged aside and lost inside the heresies that are often introduced. If you were following along, this is very similar to Paul's warning from Acts chapter 20. I preached on this as I recorded. It was this morning. Acts chapter 20, verses 17 through 35, the address of Paul to the Ephesian elders. And in that, first and foremost, for the eldership's responsibility is shepherd the flock of God, is be on guard, right? Look out for yourself and for the flock of which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. God has given a responsibility to the elders to be on guard, to make sure that the church is not going to be led astray by all these false teachings. But Jesus here in Matthew 7 is giving individuals the same kind of responsibility, that you need to be on guard. False prophets will come in. It's even the same picture. A wolf in sheep's clothing. Savage wolves will come among you, not sparing the flock. Acts 20 verses 19, or not 19. Acts 20 verses 29 and 30. Is savage wolves will come among you. Here it's the same thing in Matthew 7 verse 15. It's wolves come in. Be on guard for yourself. Even as a normal Christian, be on guard. Be true to Jesus. God's people are always going to face some kind of false teaching, some kind of challenges. Be true to Jesus. Be a fruit inspector, as is often said, or as I've heard said by some people local to me. Be a fruit inspector. Make sure that you're following after people who are actually righteous and not evil. I want to walk the straight and narrow. Who can I learn from? Not these evil people. Okay, so I want to walk the straight and narrow. How do I know what to do? What about if I just so I should just like do some good things, right? That's kind of what you're getting at, right? Is I should do some good things. To which we would say, no. You're on the right track, or you're on a better track when you say, okay, so I need to do some good things. Yeah, that's true. But there is more to it than that, as is evidenced by this next story, by this next little section called Do Not Sin. Verses 21 through 23, Jesus is recounting, he's kind of like, it's not a parable exactly, but it is kind of a parable. It's something you can understand that points to something about heaven. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, do we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and perform many wonders in your name? And I will say to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Notice that Jesus doesn't say, the natural response there, even as I'm quoting that, the natural response is to say, didn't we prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and perform many wonders in your name? And Jesus said to them, no. Right? That's like the natural response that you would expect from there. But instead, Jesus just says, does it matter? Essentially. He says, I never knew you. You workers of lawlessness, I never actually knew you. The key here to this section is it's not good enough to just avoid bad teaching, although that is an important thing to do. It is not just good enough even to do some good things. You must put away all types of evil. There are a lot of people who hear the right things, or who are successful filters, right? They have successful noise filters, and they take out all the evil stuff. And so they don't have those external evil influences pushing in on them, and yet they still don't pursue God as they ought to. And it's not that they don't pursue God. Now, if someone's willing to cut out false teachers and get rid of those things and make sure they're listening to the truth, if someone's willing to do that, it's not usually that they are what we would colloquially consider as like a bad person. Usually those are what we would colloquially consider a good person. But the problem is, God is not looking for people who are 51% good, or on balance, he's generally a good guy. God's not looking for that type of person. He's looking for people who have put away evil. And when you don't, even if you are faithful, if you still keep engaging in evil, then it sure sounds like God takes that pretty seriously. Jesus here warns of people who are not going to make it into the kingdom of heaven. The whole sermon, by the way, the whole Sermon on the Mount, the reason this series is titled The Kingdom of Heaven, which, who knows that at this point? I haven't really done a whole lot to keep bringing it up over and over and over again. But the reason this is entrance into the kingdom of heaven is because that's what the sermon is about. That's like what the theme of the sermon is. It is striking then that we get to the end and Jesus warns about people who won't make it into the kingdom. This is the entire time you've been listening to this, you're trying to make it into the kingdom, but now Jesus warns about people who won't, and they're the people, they miss out on heaven even though they look like they're really close. These are the people who knew Jesus. Verse 22. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord. Who are the people who call Jesus the Lord? The atheists don't call Jesus Lord. The agnostics don't call Jesus Lord. The Muslims don't call Jesus Lord. Any number of other groups or other beliefs don't call Jesus Lord. That's a command for Christians, or should I say people who claim to be Christians. People who call Jesus the Lord, and then what? That's the question, isn't it? These are people who know who Jesus is. This is not the unbeliever who's never heard the word before. They know who Jesus is, and yet they still miss out on heaven. Did you know that if you can tell me who Jesus is, you still might not make it to heaven? But no, it's even further than that. It's even worse than that. These are the people who acted for Jesus. Also in verse 22, didn't we prophesy in your name? And in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles. Didn't we do these things for you? Jesus doesn't say no. Maybe it's a no, and he just kind of takes it as a given that nobody believes that they did that, and so maybe I'm misreading this passage, but it sure does sound like they've actually done these things, and it ended up not counting for them at all. Paul said, I have to check myself. I have to buffet my body just in case after I preach to others, I might be disqualified. Because it is quite possible to talk all the right talk, but then end up doing evil instead. These people acted for Jesus. Great. But that didn't ultimately turn a profit because they're still evil. And that's the thing. These are people who knew Jesus, and these are people who acted for Jesus, but these are not people who really belonged to Jesus. You workers of lawlessness. In the end, they are defined not because they obeyed God, not because they obeyed God to an impressive degree with their miracles, not even because they obeyed God to a primary percentage of their life. They can be 80% faithful, but they're still deemed workers of lawlessness. All of the good that they did, they're practicers of lawlessness. That's an active pursuit. I should probably write that down. That's an important point to make. Practice makes perfect. It's something that you do over and over and over again to repeat it. It's something that you have to keep constant on. Otherwise, you fall out of practice and you aren't practicing anymore. If a doctor is practicing, that means he's currently a doctor. If he stops being a doctor, then he stops practicing in it. What does it mean when Jesus says, you who practice lawlessness? You keep on doing it. And there are people who do all the right things, and they do righteous things, and they go to church and they say all the right words, and they do their miracles, right? Even if someone were to do their miracles, great. But these guys still practice lawlessness. You can practice what God has told you to, but if you're also practicing lawlessness, then following what God told you to doesn't do anything for you, because you're not actually committing to it. You're not actually really following what God said if you are still practicing lawlessness. And there's a side note here. It's interesting to me that even people who could do miracles can still be lost, evidently. God usually uses miracles to endorse a specific message, but he can endorse a specific message, like the message of Jonah, without endorsing the person behind it, like the person of Jonah. If somebody... I know occasionally that people have appealed, if you believe that miracles still exist nowadays, and you believe that miracles are widely practiced in various kinds of churches nowadays, sometimes I get the appeal, well, if someone appeals to, sorry, confusing. Let me rewind just a second. Sometimes I get the question or the idea comes up, or I read a book or something, or I watch a video and someone proposes this idea that, well, since this group has miracles with them, that must mean that they're correct and God approves of what they're doing. And the answer is, not necessarily. Peter got the ability to do miracles, and yet wasn't always righteous, right? There could well be some things where someone has the ability to do a miracle and yet is not righteous. Those two are not mutually exclusive. I would think they would be pretty rare. I would think it's very odd, especially if the miracle is being sold as the form of a message. I don't think that can happen, but maybe this point is probably too confusing to actually try and make in the sermon itself. But since we have extra time here, people who do miracles can still be lost. If you appeal to me on how great and saved you are because you can do miracles, maybe you can do miracles. That's cool. That still doesn't mean you're right with God. And that's probably the most complicated, I'll say it tonight, although you can delve into that idea a little more if you want to. Point is, it's great to obey Jesus. It's great to know who people is. You need to know who Jesus is. It's great to act for Jesus. You need to act for Jesus. It's great to belong to Jesus. But all of it is going to be a moot point if you do not stop the evil as well. If you obey Jesus and you also obey Satan, you're not going to be a real Christian. You're not going to be saved. I mean, don't do that, right? We can be in trouble when even if we know Jesus, even if we obey Jesus, we can be in trouble if we are not, if we're following something else in addition to him. Workers of lawlessness are not allowed. You do not get heaven because you're 51% good and, it's better than half. You don't even get heaven because you're 70% good and, that's a Caesar, a passing grade. You get heaven because God is merciful. And God's not going to be merciful to people who are actively following his enemy. Don't do that. If you have to ask the question, like, well, can't I get into heaven if I do more good than I do evil? You have to ask the real question, which is, why are you doing evil? Why not cut that out? What are you hoping to achieve? God cannot be in the presence of evil. Do not sin. It's very easy to say. The sermon shows this is very difficult to live, but it is very easy to say. Obey Jesus. Obey him only. And yes, that means you have to obey. If someone comes around to you and says, well, I don't follow Jesus actively, but I don't do evil things. I don't drink. I don't party. I don't lie. I don't, steal. I don't murder. I don't adulterize. If someone comes to you and says, I don't do all of these different things, it's very much kind of like the rich young ruler, the situation there, saying, well, I've kept all the basic commandments from my youth. Like, what else is there? Okay, you know what else there is actually following Jesus. If someone comes up to you and says, well, I do a great job avoiding evil, congratulations. What does that get you? Nothing. Because you do have to actually follow after Jesus. It's not good for you to indulge yourself in hearing a bunch of evil teaching, or incorrect, false teaching. That's not going to be healthy for you. I'm not going to condemn you immediately, but it is not going to be healthy for you. It is not going to be healthy for you, or it's not going to be righteous. It's not going to help save you for you to follow after Jesus and also other things. But it's also not going to save you if you just don't follow after anything. You have to be following Jesus. It's not about avoiding bad teaching. It's not just about avoiding bad actions. It's not enough to avoid doing the bad thing. You have to actually be righteous. So, a little parable, a little story that you're all probably familiar with. You have a distinction drawn between a wise man and a foolish man. Many people who hear, they do well, but those who are wise act upon what they have heard. The wise man or the foolish man, which one will you be? The wise man is one who Jesus defines as hearing these words of mine, verse 24, and acting upon them. Someone who does. The wise man hears, and the wise man does, and the wise man actually builds a foundation. When trouble comes upon him, the rain, the wind, the flooding, the whatever, when trouble comes upon him, the wise man remains stable. But the foolish man doesn't. And the distinction with the foolish man here is fascinating, because it's not that the fool doesn't hear Jesus, it's that the fool hears Jesus and ignores him and does whatever he wants to anyway. The fool hears and does not do. He ignores the process of building the foundation, and then when trouble comes on him, he is washed away. The call is really, really simple. Hear, you have to hear, and then obey. You have to obey, and obey only Jesus. If you hear and obey Jesus and Satan, no, it's not going to work. The fool is not someone who is lacking IQ. The fool is not someone who is just kind of dumb. The fool is not someone who, made an innocent mistake. The foolish man is defined as the one who heard and who knew the truth and ignored it. Great was its fall. It's someone who heard but just would not actually do it. If you know what God wants you to do and you will not do it, there are consequences for that. Please don't be that person. God has laid a foundation, or he's willing to lay a foundation for you if you want it. It's not forced on you. You get free will. You get to choose. So choose to be wise, to hear, and to actually do the thing that God has asked you to. When Jesus finishes speaking, everyone is astounded. Verses 28 and 29 kind of deal with the ripple effect, the aftermath of that. Everyone is astounded because he knew what he was saying. He was teaching as one who had authority and not as their scribes. I don't know exactly what that means. People debate it, and we're not really exactly sure. It could mean that he knew what he was saying, as opposed to the scribes who didn't really know what they were saying. It could be that Jesus authored the material instead of the scribes who were just kind of reading through what God had already written. It could be that Jesus forced them to confront truth, where the scribes often obscured the truth and made it complicated. It could be that Jesus' words were straight and clear, whereas the scribes' words were just kind of clouded and shrouded in mystery, and they didn't really want to touch on all those difficult points. But ultimately, whatever the specific meaning is, the application is pretty clear. Jesus has authority. Jesus is God, as opposed to all those other human beings that you've been listening to. He is still the authority. If you go and read the end of Matthew, it makes that point. Actually, now he has even more authority. He has all authority in heaven and on earth. It's been given to him. The expectations have not decreased. And the final warning is we are closer to a day of final judgment than we ever have been before. So pay attention. Just do the things that you know you should be doing. And if you actually just do the things that you know, God will be with you and it'll all work out okay, as long as we are practicing righteousness instead of evil. Will you listen to Jesus' words? And if you listen, will you actually do them? That's the question, so I'll leave you with that, and we'll call that it for this week. Thank you for listening. Hopefully that's been beneficial, giving you something to think about, and hopefully you've enjoyed it or found something entertaining in there. There's a lot of stuff to add in. There's a lot of stuff to think about, and it's really simple at the end of the day if we don't get in our own way and overcomplicate things. So, thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed, hope you benefited from it, and I'll see you next week for whatever it is that we're going to be covering then.